Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and today we are on the final novel of the Dame Frevisse Medieval Mystery series, although she has a bunch of short stories that I may or may not choose to read. I should admit that the book on my that my mother loved list, I am far, far behind on reading it because I've been having trouble bringing myself to go through it. But anyways, let's talk about the Apostate's Tale. So, throughout this series, we have again and again and again returned to the theme of nuns and those who are forced to become nuns and those who choose to become nuns. The first book in this series, we have Sister Thomasine, who desperately wants more than anything to be a nun, and the woman who looks after her, who cares for her, and so on and so forth, who, is continually trying to convince her that she should not become a nun. And she well nigh has hysterics at the thought of possibly not getting to become a nun. And so you have that. You have the discussion of Sister Emma, who never really wanted to be a nun, who Frevisse not infrequently during the Outlaw's Tale, when Sister Emma is saying things like, "When I made the choice to become a nun," and Frevisse knows darned well that Sister Emma didn't choose to become a nun. Sister Emma was sent to the nunnery by her family and did her duty as a good daughter and became a nun because that was what you do when you are a good, dutiful daughter and your parents send you to a nunnery. You have The Bastard's Tale, in which Frevisse meets a young woman who was supposed to become a nun, who was sort of set to be a nun, and who, when push came to shove and was told to sit down and take your vows and be a good girl, absolutely refused, and just would not do it, and wrote to the family to get herself help to get away, and did manage to do so. And indeed, the advice that she gives to a young girl who is being effectively raised by nuns to theoretically become one, but who may not have a vocation, although she is, maybe 10 years old at the moment, so who knows. But the point is that this woman basically says to her, if you say no, they can't make you. You don't have to become a nun. You can choose to get away. And, you have that discussion. You have the discussion of Sister Thomasine, who at one point asks Frevisse, why could anyone want anything other than God? And Frevisse finds herself wondering whether it speaks better for, or worse for Sister Thomasine, that she lacks the imagination to understand why, or whether, it speaks better for her because as a nun she shouldn't want anything but God, so there you go. And you have Frevisse's own struggles with it, given that she is an intelligent woman who loved traveling, who grew up with parents who traveled all over the place, and she has her difficulties occasionally with things that she wishes she could do but can't. There are all of these discussions that go on throughout the book, throughout this series of books. Even in the second one, when you have this mother who wants her son to become a priest because she knows that he'll get, metaphorically speaking, get 3 square meals a day, that he will be clean, that he will be safe, that he will lead a life that is better than anything she could provide him, living as a serf. But he doesn't want to be a priest, and this constant battle, because her reasons for wanting him to become a priest are not devotional, they're motherly. They're reasons that don't have to do with feeling a devotion to God, but feeling a devotion to the welfare of her son. There's a bunch of other issues in that one that we're not going to go into because I talked about that book then. But the point is, it's a thing. And so, you can't avoid the discussion, but this book hits that really, really hard. And it hits it really, really hard in a way that I think is somewhat done to, I think in a way almost to remind Frevisse about other things, because one of the things that we see again and again with Frevisse is that being a nun is her vocation, it is her calling, it is what she wants, that even when she, would be happy if she could travel places and see new things, and even when she's missing it, ultimately this calling of prayers, of the daily rounds, of what you do in a nunnery, of attempting to be as close to God as possible, all this stuff, it is her thing. But in this book starts with the apostate nun, with Sister Cecily, who had given her vows to become a nun, but who ran away. And the thing is, Cecily ran away because she became a nun because her family made her, not because she had a vocation. And every time you see her perspective, every time she thinks about the nunnery, thinks about the nuns there's a lot of unpleasantness in her perspective. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of things in it. But the one thing that you see again and again is her horror about being there, about feeling like it's a narrow, empty, trapped life, that there is nothing there. And that she feels this deeply and intensely about being a nun. And at the end of the book, during the course of this book, there is a young girl whose mother claims she wants her daughter to become a nun, and it turns out that what she's really trying to do is bring her daughter to a nunnery so her daughter will see how awful being a nun is and will change her mind. Except that this is a girl who really, really does want to be a nun. And Frevisse winds up talking to the mother, saying, listen, forcing your daughter into a way of life she doesn't want will just end in sadness for everybody. And Frevisse winds up thinking about Cecily, who was in precisely the opposite position, that her family forced her into becoming a nun, and it was everything that she didn't want in life, and that Cecily was miserable, and what good was done by forcing her to become a nun. And it's this back and forth in this book that is, I hesitate to say interesting, because in some ways it's kind of tiresome, but in other ways there is this horrific clawing desperation to Cecily that she's not a nice person. But at the same time, you can see part of what happened to warp her, part of what was going on there, was that you have this woman who should never have been forced to become a nun, and she was, and it was the worst thing that could happen to her, because becoming a nun or a monk or a priest or entering into any religious vocation that has the kinds of restrictions and limitations that you have when you give the kinds of vows that you give to become, a Catholic nun or a monk, when you give those vows, you're entering into a life that is in many ways horrifically restrictive, and it's one that you can't get out of. If you choose to join the army, you can say, I've done my contract and I'm sick of this and I'm leaving. You can do all kinds of things, but if you're a true practicing Christian, Catholic rather, and you choose to do this, this is not a thing you can just back out of. But it's just the centerpiece of this book. The other centerpiece of this book, because I'm not even going to bother talking about the mystery, it's frankly not even the point in some ways in this book. I mean, it's good, it's well done, there's a bit of a red herring that I feel was, it had been used before, and I think that it was a bit of a cheat, but the thing in this book, the other thing is Frevisse, who is asked repeatedly throughout this book by various people, various nuns, and the one prospective nun, about her faith, about maintaining faith, about living as a nun, about continuing to be a nun, about not, winding up like Cecily, who fled screaming into the night at the first opportunity that she was granted. And how do you bring yourself to do this? How do you pull yourself out of it? And Frevisse, who spends a large portion of this book sort of silently muttering to herself that it shouldn't be her job to do this, it should be the prioress's job. Their prioress begs and pleads with the abbot, who, is sort of their superior overall, that they're kind of within his purview, and she begs the abbot, and luckily for Domina Elizabeth, he is her brother, and he bails her out because she can't do it anymore, because being the prioress of a small, struggling abbey, with all of the things that had been going on for years, and the troubles, and this, and this incredible economic difficulty that they are constantly in, it wore on her until she couldn't do it anymore, emotionally, mentally. She's probably suffering from some kind of severe depression and just wanted to go back to the nunnery she had come from originally and just not have this responsibility anymore, because she just couldn't take it anymore. And Frevisse winds up doing this sort of thing, and we are suddenly reminded of the book where Domina Edith, the first prioress in this series, the book where she dies, and had informed Frevisse that she really thought Frevisse would be the best prioress that they could have, but don't worry, I won't recommend you, I know how much of a horror it would be to you. And Frevisse, the final sentence of this book is that Frevisse is now the prioress. Frevisse, who never wanted this, who never wanted the responsibility, who never wanted anything like that. Domina Frevisse, prioress of St. Fridesweets, because it's not what she wants. She wants, and I mean, it is part of what makes her a better prioress, of course, is that unlike Dame Alice, she didn't want the power, and unlike Domina Elizabeth, she wasn't assigned, she was chosen, but it's the thing that speaks to Frevisse and who she is, that they want her, because even though she is sharp, and she has no patience for fools, and she doesn't do anything, Frevisse tries, and she tries, and she tries. She isn't effortlessly holy the way Dame Thomasine is, and oh yeah, Thomasine has a bit of a crisis, because Thomasine has basically worn herself out by existing in prayer, and Frevisse has to give her a stern talking to about, you exist in the real world too, and it is not a betrayal of God to do that. But because Frevisse is all of these things, she is smart and practical and wise, she's voted to be prioress. And that's the note that this series ends on. This strange combination of despair and pragmatism. And I'm out of time, so I guess that's all, and I will see you all next week.